Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. This is our 116th show. Today's guest is Guy Perelmuter, author of Present Future. Did I get your name right?
You got it. Let's go with it.
Enough?
Yeah, close enough.
So, Guy, let's start off with, can you tell us about your professional background, especially about your investment firm?
Sure. So I'm a computer engineer, and I have a master's in electrical engineering, specifically in AI, which I took back in the mid 1990s, before all the hype. I actually had a very long career doing risk management and asset allocation and financial world. Started doing some angel investing, and about 6 or 7 years ago, I started my own investment firm called Grits Capital, which is a venture capital firm focused on deep technologies.
And was your family in business as well?
No, so my dad, he was a business person. He basically was into selling and buying electronics, vacuum tubes at the time, and then some the measurement instruments. My mom, she was a stay-at-home mom, and so the whole passion for technology, I think, got started with me, actually.
Did you go, where did you go to college?
So I did college. Both my undergrad and my graduate degrees are from the local Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro, which is home for me. So that's where I did both my degrees, undergrad and graduate.
So let's talk about your book. Why did you write this book?
So back in 2016, I guess, maybe 17, I started to write a column for probably the most prestigious newspaper in Brazil, called O Estado de São Paulo, which is kind of like the New York Times in the sense that it is a local newspaper, but that you can buy it anywhere in the country because it has a lot of pull and it attracts a very interesting part of the public. So I started writing about the future of business in this newspaper, and I started to write columns on a regular basis. And my columns, they kind of talk to each other in the sense that column from week 4 was connected to column of week 3 and column 5. So it became very natural for me that after, 50 or 60 columns, I thought, I should compile them and maybe publish a book. What I didn't know was that once I kind of got all of them together and I looked at them, and it did not have the constraints of size and number of characters and number of words, I decided to kind of drill a little deeper into each one of those columns and each one of those technologies. So I ended up kind of doing a lot of historic research for the book, but the genesis was the actual columns for the newspaper.
Well, I have to tell you, I love this book because there's a lot of history about technology, and a lot of times we didn't realize how far back some of this technology really does go, and it's just getting better and better, and it's not as new as we might think. In the beginning of the book, there's a quote: "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." What's meant by that?
Right. So this quote has been attributed to a lot of people, but the actual author of this quote is Alan Kay, who worked at the historical Bell Labs back in the 1970s. And the idea is that it is very, very hard for any of us to predict the future. It's an exercise in futility to try to look 10, 20, 30 years down the road and say, okay, this is what we're going to have. We're going to have flying cars. We're going to have food transformers or whatever. The idea is that you can certainly exercise those muscles and try to pay attention at where humanity is heading. But the actual way where you can be effective about it is that you're not trying to forecast the future or predict it. You're actually dealing with the inventors that are building it. So you have a much higher probability of being correct, of being accurate in your predictions if you're not doing any guesswork. You're actually talking to the people who are building the future in many different areas.
Spoken like a venture capitalist.
Indeed, yes.
How old were you when you developed your love of technology, and what type of technology was that? Because you talk about that in the book.
Absolutely. So I think this comes, from my, very, very young years. I remember my first big break into technology. I think I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and I was at a shopping mall with my mom, and there was this little corner store that was offering programming lessons for kids. And I remember I was blown away with the idea that I would eventually be able to sit down in front of a computer and type a few commands and kind of bend it to my will. And that became like an obsession to me. And I kind of pestered my parents for days and weeks and months until I got it not only into the course, but eventually until they bought me, my own computer for me to play around with and to figure out what was that magical machine that could do stuff where instead of you getting information like you get from a TV or a radio set where you're passively getting information in, you could actually deliver information and get the feedback and get the conversation going. So yeah, it's been a while since that happened.
So instead of being the next Pele, you focused on technology.
Very, very early on, that was my calling, and I never looked back.
And it was a good calling, as anybody who reads this book is going to see. Do you read a lot of science fiction? If so, who influences you the most?
Yes, I mean, I'm an avid reader, and as I grew older, I became a little more, I think, eclectic, and I started reading about, more topics, more subjects, but science fiction has always kind of accompanied me. I think, I really like John Scalzi. He's like this incredibly creative, prolific sci-fi writer. I'm a big fan of Philip K. Dick. I think I read everything about that he ever wrote. I'm also a fan of the classics, both Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. I've read, again, most of their work. So and again, more recently, William Gibson and authors that are kind of trying their hand at different aspects of sci-fi, but both in movies and in books, that's definitely my favorite genre.
And we found that whatever they've written as books has eventually happened over time. May not happen when they're writing them, but certainly in the future, they've been true. In your lifetime, what's the most meaningful technology you've seen developed, and why?
I think that's a good one. I think the microprocessor, if you look at the, when I started programming computers back in the 1980s, I guess, we're looking at, processing powers that were negligible compared to what we have today. But that was the genesis of everything that surrounds us, not only computers or phones or tablets, but now cars and refrigerators and coffee makers, and pretty much every single machine and every single interaction we have with the artificial world, I think can be traced to that particular breakthrough. Not only the transistors back in the late 1950s, but especially the microprocessing power that actually ushered the third industrial revolution, and that ultimately raised the fourth industrial revolution, which is where we are right now.
You mentioned you learned to program the Sinclair, I think it's the ZX81 at age 9. I never heard of that computer. I go back to the Radio Shack days, if you've heard of Radio Shack here in the US, but what did you learn from that, and how has that affected you today?
Oh yeah, so yes, the Radio Shacks. I remember the first time I stepped into a Radio Shack, they were selling a TRS 80, which was a relatively robust computer when compared to the Sinclairs. But that was the time when it was a Sinclair's, TRS 80s, and then the Apple One, and then Apple II, and then things started to take off. But ultimately, the Sinclair was a very simple computer. Its storage was based on a tape recorder, those cassette tapes that K7 tapes that you use for storage, and that the principles behind the computer, the screen, the keyboard, the storage unit, the programming languages, those were principles that I learned back then and that are still valid right now. So it was for me very instrumental in learning that if you are a good engineer, or if you're a good builder, or if you are someone who can ultimately understand how building blocks relate to each other, then you'll be fine, right? You can learn multiple programming languages, you can learn multiple architectures, because you have a solid knowledge of how those basic building blocks they interact with each other.
You write about deep tech revolution. What's that?
So if you think about the world around us, right, and the innovation that we experience, there are, roughly speaking, two families of innovation, right? There's the soft technology, which is basically people taking existing technologies and merging them together and combining them together so that they can provide a new service. So you can think of Uber, for instance, as one of those soft technologies. They're taking on a very simple level the idea of the GPS, the idea of your need for transportation, and the idea of this distributed network of drivers, and they're providing a new service to you. But there's no real technical breakthrough other than and of course, again, I'm oversimplifying this, but it's all about software and databases and optimization algorithms. But if you think about the other types of technologies, the deep tech technologies, these are technologies that are actually pushing the frontiers forward, right? When we talk about a new type of drug discovery process, a new device that will help people with any sort of disability to perform better in their daily lives. When you talk about new sources of energy, storage of energy, new models that will help you be able to send rocket ships to space or optimize the orbit of satellites, everything where you have to have a very deep technical background and create a new sort of technology. That's what we call a deep tech.
You mentioned focusing on technologies that are inevitabilities. How do you define them, and what are they?
So yeah, that's another fantastic question, because it ties nicely into your previous question about inventing the future versus predicting the future. Because once you start looking at some secular trends, you can ultimately be much better equipped to handle what's coming down the pipe. So let's talk, for instance, about our lifespan, right? This is an inevitability in my view. We are going to live longer. We're going to live to be older than the previous generations. This is a trend that has been consistently unfolding before our eyes, and this has many ramifications. If you look at drug discovery, therapeutics, diagnostics, medical devices, digital health. So all those families of companies and of innovations, they are inevitable, because they're sitting at the intersection of a trend that has been playing out for many decades, and that is actually astonishing if you think about how our lifespan as a species has increased and how we have changed completely the types of diseases that are actually killing us. We now have a complete different profile of threats to our health, and these are the companies and these are the initiatives that are going to kind of shield us from that. Another inevitability, I think, has to do with urbanization, right? Cities. If you look at the world until 2015, as recent as 2015, we had about a 50-50 split between people that lived in rural areas versus people that lived in cities and urban areas. And as of 2015, now we're now getting more and more people going into cities. And again, this is a trend. This is an inevitability because we have more robots and more autonomous systems in the fields. We're being more efficient to crop, to be able to create food for the planet. Less people with more efficiency, and more people are seeking opportunities within cities, within urban areas. And there are many books about the subject. So again, that unlocks a whole new part of the venture world, which is Internet of Things, mobility, energy, clean tech, optimization of many types of services. So again, inevitabilities are trends that are not dependable on which government is going to be in power, which opinion you have about the world, what is your favorite color. These are things that are going to happen whether you like it or not, and we try to position ourselves in a way that we can benefit our investors from those inevitabilities.
Before I start with the questions from the audience, I do wonder this. Why is it that people during the pandemic started doubting pharmaceutical healthcare technology, and yet they totally believe in their phone technology, computer technology, all these other things? I mean, they have some fear of some of these things, but why do you think people are questioning? Because half of us were willing to take those shots willingly. We've been taking shots since we were kids, and there's a good chunk, at least in the United States, that was totally resistant to getting those COVID shots, even though the research and the outcomes that we could plainly see favored getting those shots. Why do you think people have these significant doubts?
I think the heart of this question goes into actually one of the chapters of the book where we talk about social media and social networks, which are probably one of the key risks for our civilization as we know it going forward, along with biotechnological risk and cyber risk, because we have created a world where opinions become more important than facts. And if someone with a handful of followers and a very deep background in immunology tells you something, and someone who has absolutely no knowledge of biology or viruses or immunology, but happens to have a gazillion followers for whatever reason, that person is amplified and become much more relevant. And the problem is that we, as a species, we are very susceptible to what our peers are thinking. And what happens is that I have not a shot in hell in terms of trying to convince someone that vaccines save lives because I'm too far away from their point of view and their reality on a day-to-day. The thing that people don't understand is that the further apart you are from that particular person or community from a principles perspective, the harder it will be for you to convince them. The best person to convince you of something is someone who shares 80 or 90% of your beliefs, because that's someone you relate to. He or she will make part of your community. So I think this is the signal that the harm that social networks in particular are creating, and why we can pinpoint this problem to social networks, because there are plenty of studies that shows that the increase in suicide rates among teenagers, they match the popularization of social networks, where image is much more important than substance. It's because now we have something in 2022, we have something that is called the flat earth society. So there are people that are actually believers, or they claim to be believers, that the earth is flat. So all this nonsense, all this stupidity, all this idiocy, it is part of the same problem. And vaccines, or the fear that vaccines are going to install a microchip to track you, or that they are using us as guinea pig. Although that nonsense, I think it's part of the same root problem, which, as we know, is generating terms that I think none of us thought we would ever hear, like alternate facts, right? That was uttered in the second or third day of the first and last mandate of President Trump, where people were talking about alternate facts or alternate truth. And the fact of the matter is that, you can be flexible and you can be subjective and you can be understandable about a ton of things. But in many, many cases, fortunately, the truth is not subject to comments or to opinions. It is what it is. And unfortunately, I think that we are in this path for the long run. I think this is the new reality we'll have to deal with. And we are seeing initiatives that are trying to deal with these challenges.
Yeah, and now you've just destroyed all my beliefs, and now I've got to switch the social media that I got to be listening to. The fact that you tell me the Earth isn't flat, Jesus, I don't know what happened there.
It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts.
That's been a thought for a few hundred years, but now you've dispelled it. So when I'm in that plane,
there are so many ways you can disprove that, but still, you can Google it. It's a thing. It's a society of people that say no, it's a scam. Actually, the Earth is flat. And again, I don't have any handle to deal with people like that, because what you're going to tell them, you're going to show them a picture. I'm sure they saw photos of the Earth already. I'm sure they know about time zones. I'm sure they know about curvature of the Earth. I'm sure Coriolis effect. I'm sure they know about all that stuff. But still, they believe whatever they believe. And again, if you ask me, it's a waste of time and energy, and this takes far too much airtime that we have to deal with this nonsense.
And now you're going to tell me that Elvis still isn't alive. So this is going to be a big disappointment to me. So we have a question from the audience. How do you see the impact of global warming, climate change on lifespan and health going forward? What technological solutions do you see coming along to address these issues?
That's a great question. And actually, as is the case often in history, technology not only solves problems, but it also creates problems. If you want to trace the origins of the warming of the atmosphere, it goes back. It started really with the first industrial revolution. This is when we started to send out gases that ultimately trap heat in the atmosphere and create this effect over centuries, right? So technology, this is a critical problem, and you can argue that this is the key problem in our times, because we are, as we have been alerted to by thousands of scientists and dozens of reports over the last few years, we're running out of time to make this process reversible, right? We're actually almost at a point of no return, where ecosystems that are very delicately balanced are going to be damaged for good. So technology will play a role, and it will depend on technology to come to the rescue, because we're not going to revert to a pre-first industrial revolution way of life, right? We'll continue to need electricity for heating, for our devices, fuel for traveling. So the technology that I'm seeing today, that's the renaissance of climate tech. There was a brief spell of climate tech in the early 2000s that was ultimately a way very much concentrated in solar energy and solar panels, but that didn't play out really well for investors for several reasons. But right now, I think we're going to live through the golden years of climate technologies. We're going to see technologies for carbon sequestration, new batteries, new fuels, reduction of emissions, new materials. So this is going to be, I think, the way our exit in this path that we're trailing that is not going to end well for us. So I think that we will rely on those new technologies to kind of save all of us.
And we need a solution, because I'm not giving up my steak.
Right.
I like meat too much. I'm just not giving it up.
I hear you.
Another question from the audience: like the engine transformed transportation, do you think the ability to bypass programming languages not using AI to mimic what coders do would transform computing?
Well, this no-code, low-code trend is something that we've seen before. I mean, there've been and again, for whoever reads the book, this is going to be a very common thread in the book where technologies that we believe are new actually have been around for decades, if not centuries, and the low-code, no-code is one of those. I think that as we create better tools, more sophisticated tools, we will be able to accelerate the development of new services, new products, new systems. However, if history is any guide, the pace with which we do that will also require new processors, new hardware, new architectures. So at the end of the day, the relevance of those architectures and the relevance of those methods are going to go back to what I mentioned before. People have to be aware and knowledgeable of which building blocks we're talking about, because those are not going to go anywhere. It's just the means through which you're going to achieve that objective. And if you look at tools that are getting a lot of media attention, like DALL-E, for instance, by OpenAI, where you can describe a scene and in a matter of seconds, the computer will create an image that perfectly reflects your description, and actually it creates a batch of images so that you can choose from that. This is again a very sophisticated model by our current standards of taking a very old concept, which is the concept of books and illustrations and paintings and sculpture and arts. So again, the tools change, the models change, the frameworks change, but the building blocks are there. And if you can master those building blocks and you can spot those trends, where those building blocks are heading to, then I think you're going to be in good shape.
Another question from the audience. What are your thoughts on the future of fintech companies diving into digital payments, Web3, cryptocurrency, NFTs, and the metaverse? We have that question as part of my questions too. So we're just jumping into that earlier.
So let's try to kind of break that down, because there's a lot to unpack there. And again, I'll try to be thorough, but we're definitely not going to be able to dig deeper so that we can have other topics to discuss. But let's start. Let me carve out the metaverse from this conversation, because the metaverse, again, is a new name for virtual reality, which has been around for decades and which still has a very important challenge that has to do with our form factor, right? Humans. Right now, for you to get immersed into virtual reality or in a metaverse, you need one of those goggles that you put, and that will kind of give you 120 degrees of field of vision. And that's just something that we humans don't like. We don't like to attach anything to our bodies. We'd rather have simpler things. There are people actively working on contact lenses that will ultimately, you just stick them in your eyes, and then you can overlay augmented reality, and in the future, eventually virtual reality. There are people working in monitors where you just kind of get a little closer to the monitor, and you got this depth of field illusion. So the metaverse is a tool that has been around. Second Life, which many of you may have heard of or played with eventually, I think is like a 20-year-old piece of software which did exactly what the idea of the metaverse does, which is provide you with an avatar and let you kind of make new acquaintances and visit new places. So the metaverse is something that we'll certainly continue to see developing, and the confusion spans from the fact that in the metaverse, you can see a lot of use cases for digital assets and NFTs and so on and so forth. And this is why people kind of merge those topics together. So let me carve out digital assets and NFTs. NFTs in the real world, and again, the cheap shot is to say, yeah, they're taking ape JPEGs and they're selling those for millions and millions of dollars. And sure, that was the world of art was one that NFTs were very appropriate, if you will, to be applied to, because that's a world that has never been disrupted before, and people who developed digital art wanted to create this idea of authenticity, of you have the original work of art, even though I can copy and paste that thousands and millions of times. But the NFT's true potential lies into you making life simpler in the real world with certificates of authenticity, certificates of transfer, buy and selling stuff. And this ties back into the blockchain. So the NFTs and the blockchain, they have their own business utility. And I think we're going to be exploring those as the problems in logistics in the world continue to unfold, because blockchains are going to be great to simplify and to make supply chains better and faster and quicker. And again, there are several companies out there that are actually doing this kind of work, which is not as glamorous, that doesn't capture headlines in newspapers and in magazines, but that's where the utility function of both NFTs and blockchains reside, in my opinion, right now. Now, finally, we get to cryptocurrencies and fintech and DeFi. And the thing with that is that there is a bigger player in the room when you talk about finance, right? So when you talk about crypto, and you can argue and make a case that no, this is the way to distribute wealth. This is the way for democratizing wealth and no barriers to transfer money from A to B, from B to C. But the fact of the matter is that there are no areas in the tech world that are more highly concentrated than NFTs and crypto. I mean, like 90% or plus of the assets in those areas are detained by 5% of less of users. So this whole democratizing distribution, that's not the angle. I think that the idea and the probable outcome of all this movement, which has certainly a ton of value, is going to be for governments and central banks, central authorities, because we're talking about something that has to be universally acknowledged as having a standard and value, to be able to accelerate the creation of a digital dollar or a digital euro or digital renminbi, where you will have tools. And again, the question starts with models of payment. I think we're going to be less and less dependent on traditional methods of payment. I think most of us already have very little use for cash, for paper money. Most of us use our phones, our watches, and our cards, our plastics to deliver payments. And I think that this is the trend in finance for the next few years that is more shielded from the noise and the speculation that goes hand in hand with crypto at this point, because there's ultimately no underlying value in those currencies, right? You cannot touch why someone arbitrated that 21 million Bitcoins are the only Bitcoins available, and this is why they're valuable. But if you think about it, everybody who owns Bitcoins converts those Bitcoins into dollars to know how much they're worth. This is the measure that tells you maybe this is not intrinsically worth anything, because I'm always trying to look at the dollar value. So I'm not saying that crypto doesn't has its utility, because it certainly has, but I don't think people are looking to the right place, and I think eventually the market will kind of prove that view as correct.
It's funny about cryptocurrencies. There are 18,000 cryptocurrencies because I'm involved in a metaverse venture that we're raising capital for. And one of the potential investors is a relatively big entertainment company that wants to get into that space. And out of the 18,000, there's really only Ethereum. Am I pronouncing that right? That's the only one that's really attached to a product where there's like actual value. Everything, none of the other 17,999 are attached to anything.
That's right. You can ultimately say we can create the best business minds coin and go with it, and it will be worth whatever we say it's worth. But the fact of the matter is that if you go in Amazon or at a supermarket, at a grocery store, and you tell them you want to pay for your groceries with the best business mind coin, I think they'll tell you, yeah, why don't you exchange those for dollars, and then we can talk. right?
Yeah, and that's what our metaverse venture is. That's why these guys are interested, is because they can make their cryptocurrency from all the concerts and everything that we're going to be doing.
Right.
It will actually be worth something because people will use it for buying an actual thing, whether it's NTFs or going to the concert. It makes it actually a real currency. Another question from the audience, another area I've been hearing about recently is SynBio, restructuring DNA and RNA to solve medical problems and create improvement in humans and other animals. Do you see important trends in this area?
Well, before I answer that, let me tell you, your audience is awesome. These guys are incredible. These questions are so thoughtful and so cutting edge. So I love it. So thanks for that. And thanks for giving me the chance to interact with these folks. So synthetic biology is definitely one of those trends that we're going to listen to and hear about more and more over time. The concept behind synthetic biology is that the same way you can program an electronic circuit to do whatever you want, like you take little building blocks and you put them together, and then you have a calculator or you have a radio or you have a phone, you will be able to do something similar with biological circuits, right? And our knowledge and domain and understanding of the tools that compose life, genes, DNA, RNA, and all those processes that go into building proteins that we have recently seen a deep mind crack the mystery that has been around for ages on how those amino acids, they kind of get together and how you can predict the way they're going to fold into a 3D structure that is critical for our understanding of the function of those proteins. All those things, they point into a world where you're going to see companies that are going to try to reprogram those building blocks, that are going to try to reprogram those structures in order to create, if you have a deficiency of a specific enzyme, or if you have an overflow of a specific protein, those commands that they'll be able to program within those cells will be able to help you out. So yes, absolutely, synthetic biology is going to be a key part of our lives. And this is a trend that I think will increase over the next decade significantly.
Funny, all those things, if you told somebody that would make their sex life better, all those people who wouldn't take the COVID shot would take those in a heartbeat, right?
Yeah, again, it's about social media, it's about image, it's about you being able to have an interface. And again, this is very critical, an interface with the world that is pleasing to you and pleasing to your ego. So vaccines don't have a great interface. It hurts when you take them. It hurts for like 2 seconds, but it hurts. And you cannot see them working, you cannot feel them working sometimes. So therein lies a big challenge with the world of biology.
Another question from the audience. I see Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos as the two top people to predict the future. Musk views AI with much trepidation. Using example, if you're building a road, there happens to be an anthill in the way, so with no animosity to the ends, they must go. He further suggests if there's a World War III, will likely be started by AI. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I disagree with that. I don't think that this is the case. I think that we have romanticized AI for forever, and this is true with any sort of technology. We humans, we always extrapolate, and we like the drama, and we like to create those scenarios where a robot will kind of rise against us, and a specific computer program will become sentient, and then it will control the electrical grid and shock us all to death and all that. I think that there are specific cases of specific AIs that can absolutely become too complex for us to control. So if you take, for instance, a drone, and you tell a drone that you leave the ultimate pulling of the trigger to a machine, yes, sure, we can run into problems, because machines, as much as we try to program them and develop them, they are imperfect. And there's actually a story that I tell in the book about how this was a very real risk that we faced back in the 1960s during the crisis of the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, where you saw that Soviet Union, at the time the Soviet Union was still a thing, they lost communication with the surface. And that was one of the instances where they were ordered to start a nuclear attack, because that meant if a loss of communications would mean that they were being attacked by the US, and you needed the unanimous vote of 3 officers on board a submarine to actually turn the key and launch the attack. And one of those 3, only one of those, actually the youngest, said, I'm not in favor. We have to surface. We have to double check if that's the case. I will not start a nuclear war. And again, if you had relied 100% on machines to do that, you would have run into severe problems. And in 1983, John Badham directed a very, very cool movie called War Games with Matthew Broderick.
I love that movie.
There you go. It's the same thing. If you leave, it's all about taking people from the decision-making cycle. And again, as much as we want to believe that we are going to create a sentient artificial intelligence, I think we're not grasping. We're not at the early days of grasping consciousness and how that would actually come to fruition. I think that the chances are, going back to the synthetic biology question, that when we start merging biological systems and artificial systems, that will start to create some sort of glimpse of what could happen. But right now, I think we can rest assured that other than very specific weaponized applications that hopefully people will not deliver 100% of the responsibility to machines, I didn't see a Skynet in our future at all.
Another question from the audience. What do you see as the biggest potential and benefits in terms of biotechnology? What are some of the amazing things you see happening in this space today and in the future?
So biotechnology it may be roughly divided into several fields. So you can think diagnostics, you can think therapeutics, you can think drug discovery, you can think device development. So the things that we are more excited about right now have to do with the things that have been more difficult for us to understand and to fight, right? If you look at the profile, and I think I alluded to this a few minutes ago, if you think about the profile of the diseases that killed people over the last few decades or centuries, you'll see that this has been changing over time. So in the past, if you had smallpox or measles or mumps or pneumonia or even influenza, that was almost a death sentence, right? We've lost, hundreds of millions of people over the history of civilization for diseases that today don't kill anyone, right? Of course, if you don't want to be vaccinated, then you'll be killed by stupidity in the form of measles, probably. But ultimately, we have control over our destiny. We know how to handle that. So what has been killing us now have been the diseases that are more associated with older age, right? The diseases like cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, chronic diseases. So what I'm most excited about in biotechnology is that they are kind of focusing on those types of diseases, like many types of cancers, rare diseases, diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, diseases that are going to become more prevalent because as we grow older and as we live longer, something that we have already established is inevitable, we're going to see more of those. A cataract in your eyes is almost 100% sure to happen if you live long enough. People that don't develop cataracts, they don't develop it because they died before it happened, but it's almost inevitable. So this has to do with the wear and tear of our bodies, of our arteries, of our genes, of our muscles, of our tendons, of our bones, and all those diseases that come with time, with wear and tear, are probably the ones that excite me the most. And the ones that impact a relatively small percentage of the population that had not a lot of chance to be handled. but now we have, hundreds of companies that are trying to deal with rare diseases, terrible diseases that will be able, hopefully, to control and to cure. So yes, it is just a fascinating field that is of interest to all 7.5 billion of us, right? Everybody has a vested interest in those companies' success.
So let me ask you a business question here. When we watched highly innovative companies like Kodak, one of the most well-known brands on the planet Earth, essentially disintegrate, what can we learn from their fall?
Yeah, this has to do with something that I think most of you have already heard, and there are books published about that called the innovator's dilemma. The irony in Kodak's case is that the idea of digital photography and the patent, the original patent for digital photography, was created by a young engineer who worked at Kodak. And this engineer, he presented his invention to the senior management at the company, and the senior management dismissed that, not because they thought it was a terrible idea, but because it would, if they succeeded, by definition, they would kill their whole business, which was, of course, selling, film for cameras, for analog cameras. So and we've seen this movie, right, with Blockbuster, with Nokia, with BlackBerry. Those are companies that eventually died an ugly death because they were not able to innovate quickly enough, or they actually saw the innovation, but they thought, well, this is going to hurt us in the short term, in the next couple of quarters of earnings, so we should kind of not do it. And this is why we are in the golden age of venture capital, because incumbents or businesses have realized that now their survival depends on innovation. In the 1930s, if you were a company listed in the S&P 500, you would be listed for, on average, 90 years, 90, right? In 2025, by all estimates, if you are a company listed in the S&P 500, you will be listed on average for 14 years, 14. So the way that companies are going to fight obsolescence is through innovation, is through avoiding to be surprised by a new technology or a new technique that will hurt their prospects of being relevant in the future.
You write the technology for autopilot, self-driving has been around for over 100 years. Didn't realize it was 100 years. What was the first self-driving technology, and how far are we from being like the Jetsons, where the vehicles take and pick us up without, crashing into somebody else?
Yeah, no, that's a great story about autopilot and the creation of autopilot in the 1930s. First autonomous cars were tested at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh in the late 1980s. But they were bulky research projects, very expensive, very slow, nothing that could be applicable in the real world. And now, of course, we've come a long way, but the idea of you taking a car in downtown Philadelphia and driving autonomously all the way to downtown Manhattan, for instance, I think we're still, far away from that, except for, highways and freeways where the unforeseen situations are more rare. If you talk about driving in a city, you are still very far from being able to completely dominate the number of edge cases, which are cases that your algorithm does not necessarily handle. And I'll give you guys one example that happened a few months ago, actually, and that was well documented in the research community. There was this autonomous vehicle that was riding, and it stopped on a traffic light behind a car, right? And what this car had, this was a pickup truck, and this pickup was loaded with traffic lights that were flashing multiple colors because they're being transported to some maintenance station. So here you are, a driving car, a self-autonomous car driving and looking at what, by all intents and purposes, is a traffic light. But it's not the traffic light you have to respect. It's a traffic light that is sitting on a pickup truck and that is faulty, that is not working well. So how do you handle that edge case? And so the idea of developing AI that can handle this and every other situation that you can think of over time that will let you sleep in the car because you'll be transported safely and securely from downtown Philly to downtown Manhattan. I think we're still, years, if not decades away from that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like Wyoming and less populated states, that's doable. But if you're in New York and somebody jumps in front of your car, the stopping and starting can't be computer overload, it sounds to me.
It's very challenging. There is actually a very famous problem, psychological problem, which is called the trolley problem, which is if you are an AI and you're given the alternative, you will crash because someone just jumped in front of your car, and either you hit this person or you'll swerve left or right. And when you do that, you'll run over pedestrians or bikers or whatever, and you have to make a decision. This is an ethical and moral question. And actually, I put the link on the book to a website where you can answer which decisions you would make. It's called the Moral Machine. It's an exercise that was developed at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and you can ultimately see how your ethics or your morals stack against, your peers, your fellow humans. So, yeah, it's a very, very complex problem to crack.
That might make me very sad to see how the rest of society looks at these things. You talk about you define the Internet of Things, and how do you define the Internet of Things, and what's important impact will this have on our work and possibly personal relationships, along with what are the biggest business opportunities in this area?
So you can think of the Internet of Things as transforming anything that exists solely in the real world as an object that will now exist in the digital world, right? So when computers came along, those were the only inhabitants of the digital realm of the internet world, right? You connected computers that were able to exchange information among themselves. But now with the advent of sensors and the price collapse that we've seen over the last few years in those sensors, you can measure things relatively easily. And more importantly, you can transmit that measurement to a computer, hence the internet. So you have now sensors that are able to pick up on temperature, heartbeat rate, oxygen levels, humidity, air pressure, and so on and so forth. So virtually everything that is measurable now can be measured by a minuscule device that can be attached to a machine or to a person or to an animal or to a plant, and this information will flow into the digital realm. And then you can apply all the techniques that you apply to digital data, big data analysis, data cleansing, data warehousing, AI, computer vision. I mean, you can ultimately do everything you can do with bits and bytes with information that was up until recently available only for humans to look at and consume. So the business opportunities are tremendous because now you can think of, if you are an airline or if you are a transportation company or if you are a retail company, you can ultimately tag your clothes, your engines, your planes, your tractors with those sensors, and you can read not only what those sensors are being able to capture, but also the interactions that those machines or equipments they have with their environment, and you can make them better, and you can ultimately create new business lines based on the insights that billions of data points will give you. The key insight from Internet of Things is that in the past, you had to use just a sleeve of the use cases that you were able to capture in order to be able to produce any kind of insight. With IoT, you can use every single use case available to you, and this will allow you to create and to make sure that your product, your service, is going to be able to satisfy the needs of all of your clients and not a specific group. So this is huge for pretty much every single business out there.
let's talk about gene editing, which sounds like a great idea for preventing or correcting genetic problems like cancer, Down syndrome, and other physical and mental issues. But it also could be used possibly to create superhuman soldiers, which I think is what a lot of government are interested in. What is your thought on the upside and downside of genetic editing here?
Like pretty much every technology, right out of the gates, technologies are born with a lot of potential for good and for bad. This is no different. If you look at the possibility, the sheer possibility that you can fix a potential defect in the genetic code of a human being that would be otherwise plagued with a terrible disease, it's our moral duty to go ahead and fix this. And the problem you're alluding to, which is a very real one, is where does the border between avoiding a problem or curing a disease and starting to enhance a human being, where do you draw the line? And I am of the belief that you know where the line is, right? Every human being is born with an innate sense of right and wrong. And I think that no one would argue if you look at the genome and said, well, this child is going to be born with a severe deformity if we don't fix this gene. I think everybody will say, let's absolutely go ahead and fix this gene. And if people said, okay, this child, if I change this gene, we're going to make sure that it's going to be taller and stronger than their colleagues, then you're going to say, well, this is where I draw the line. Because if every single parent wanted to do that for their kids, then by the argument of arbitrage, every kid will be taller and stronger, and the advantage will disappear, and we'll create a race of stronger and taller people. So the strength, you can argue that the strength that we as humans have is diversity, is that there are people that are taller, that are shorter, that see better, that hear better, that have perfect pitch. We're talking about music in the beginning of this conversation. Perfect pitch and the magic of humankind and diversity is that those interactions between those perfectly imperfect people generate collisions in the world we live in. So I think it's definitely a risk. But I think we absolutely have to open that door, because the benefits that this will create for thousands of families and thousands of individuals that would have otherwise to live with terrible disease and pain. I think that's something that we have now that we know the keys to fix those. I think we absolutely should.
Yeah, and this is, you end up legislating things. One of my students at Wharton was a sports doctor, and he said there are parents coming in with their kids have perfectly normal arms, and the kids are throwing 89-mile-an-hour fastballs, but they want them to get them into the mid-90s. So they want them to have Tommy John surgery and kind of game the system.
That's exactly right. And again, we've seen that in one hand, parents are always trying to do the best for their kids and give them an edge and give them an advantage, but there's always a moral compass you have to abide to. And this is where it's very gray, and for a few people it's darker gray, for a few people it's lighter gray, and for a few people there's no distinction between those two. And this is something that will accompany us forever, because it's human nature. I just think that we should not stall the progress of gene editing for important and serious diseases just because of those edge cases that we will have to face no matter what.
I agree with you, or for religious reasons.
Right.
3D printing has evolved into creating body parts on the plus signs and non-detectable guns on the negative side. Where do you see the greatest impact for 3D printing, and will we all own one that will be used to do creative endeavors and fixing problems like broken items around the house?
That's a great question, because there are people that claim that in the future you don't buy anything, you download the instructions for your domestic 3D printer to just print your sneakers or your jeans or your shirt or your glasses or whatever. And again, I think this is still very, very far away in the future because of materials, because of the complexities and so on and so forth. But the 3D printing has been around since the 1970s. The first patents for 3D printing have been deposited in the 1970s. So it's not like it's a technology that was created yesterday, but like so many technologies that we talk about in the book, the conditions for they to come to light and become economically viable have just been created. So my vision is that we will start to see 3D printing serving specific industries like medical, dental, definitely manufacturing, and that it will take a while for us to see that creeping into consumer life on a meaningful way. I think people are going to be able to, yes, buy 3D printers to play around, create models, plastic models, resin models, or aluminum models, or whatever. But ultimately, I think this is a technology that will come of age when we see that optimization of the supply chain that we mentioned before, leveraging the capacity that now a business will have, instead of ordering an inventory of 1,000 parts, saying, okay, I will need 3 of those parts in the next 12 days because my sensors installed in my machines have indicated there's a failure that is going to show up in the next week or so. So therein lies the interconnectivity between all those areas. So I do believe that 3D printing is still, for the time being, it's going to be recreational for still quite some time for us consumers, but it's going to become more and more instrumental for manufacturing businesses of all sorts and types. And this is probably one of the most interesting trends we're going to see play out in the 2020s, I think.
Guy, I'll tell you that this hour went super fast, and I'd love to have you come back again, because I think all of us could have spent the whole day with you listening to you talk about these different topics. And so I'm hoping you'll write another book after this one, now that you've got the bug. And believe me, you'll want to write another one, and people want to hear more of your thoughts, because these things are constantly changing so quickly. So I thank you again for speaking with us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. And I'll make sure everybody knows where they can get this amazing book that they'll end up reading not once, but a few times to pick up everything.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. Thanks everybody for listening in. It's going to be a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Everybody have a great, safe weekend. Take care.